We're going to kick off with a question for everyone. I'm going to get everyone to answer this question and to kind of, I guess, while you're answering it, give a bit of a sense of your perspective, like the organisation you work for and where they fit within this kind of question of fashion. So we'll kind of go along the panel. So kind of with over 300,000 tonnes of textile waste being discarded each year, how do you think we should tackle this mountain of waste? Where do you think the solutions are? Kirsten, we'll start with you from Reverse Garbage.
We've only got 2 hours, haven't we? From Reverse Garbage's point of view, which I'm just going to do a little plug, we turn 50 next year. Yeah. And I think Reverse was at the forefront of reuse. We have been using the correct terminology for 50 years, and I think that is the basis of a lot of what will drive sustainability and into the future. And sustainability you can use in a very broad term, but for us it is always been about education. So we were started by teachers, we still go out to schools, school come to us. In the more recent years, since I've taken over as CEO, it's about advocacy on the board, big picture. I don't think Reverse Garbage has a lot more to offer than just being somewhere where you go and get something for your dioramas for school projects. We have a huge social, environmental and economic impact. And for me, at this point in time, it's about using the correct terminology, and that is reuse over recycling. So I think for me, that is the absolute crux for the moment of how we're going to drive this conversation forward.
Yeah, to fix the mistake made by that idiot that did the War on Waste show when it should have been about resources, hey? That guy really stuffed up. When I find him...
Yes, and here I am. But, there's another show in the offing, Craig.
Yeah. War on resources doesn't sound as good, let's be fair. Adam, okay, where do you fit into that? Because you're interesting, city council, but also fashion publicist.
Yeah, well, I've been a fashion publicist for 30 years, and, now in the position I'm in the council, I realise that I've actually helped create the 300,000 tonne, and that's only last...
I'm glad you owned up to that, because I was about to say that.
Yeah, I don't know, and it's like, that's only last year. What about the year before, and the year before, and the year before? So, yes, I've been a huge part of encouraging people to buy and need more. And, we were speaking earlier, the fashion industry oh, gosh, I've got you on the other side. Okay. But no, the thing is, the fashion industry used to be... there was 2 seasons a year. It was like spring and winter. And then we had this thing that was introduced, which was called High Summer. And it was the best-selling styles from spring that you would you'd use the same patterns, but you would buy new, brighter, more interesting High Summer prints. And that was it. But now... there's a new collection like every week, and we're encouraging people, in that churn and burn mentality. There are solutions for it. But anyway, as a fashion publicist, I do feel slightly guilty, and I would like to now dedicate my time to hopefully educating people on not to continue to buy so much. But look, from a council point of view, and I think we'll most probably talk about this further, is... when it comes to the glass bottles that we collect, I mean that is going back into roads. Clarence Street, I think it was about a 200-metre long section of Clarence Street. It has something like, I think it's 100,000 bottles within that section of the road. Everything in our yellow bin goes to recycle centres. We have food waste which gets composted. We have our Better Business building scheme, which encourages properties to operate in a more sustainable manner. We've got our destination partners, so we're trying to greenify our tourism sector, but textile is the one that is the missing link at the moment, and it's one of the biggest contributors. So just recently I brought a notice of motion asking the city to look into textile waste. So hopefully, if we're sitting here again next year, I can tell you about it then.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it is a tough one. I must admit, when we do it on War on Waste, we always struggle in the fashion part. To be honest, it's a tough one. Jaana, what's the Australian Fashion Council? Where do they fit into this, and what do you think is the solution?
Yeah, so the Australian Fashion Council is the peak body in Australia for fashion brands, retailers and manufacturers. So we represent the whole value chain. So our members are essentially at the forefront of transitioning Australian business. We represent Australian founded and majority owned fashion businesses. So our members are the ones that are on a day-to-day basis considering what does circularity mean from a clothing production perspective, how do you design and develop things that people want to buy, how do you better predict what the trends are and understand those and then bring them to market, and then and how do you support throughout that life cycle of consumer engagement with the clothing, how do you support them understanding the responsibilities through that chain in the sense of washing and repairing, for example, your clothing to keep it in use, and then what do you do with it at the end of life? And also our brands are those ones that are extremely challenged at the moment by the influx of sort of international e-commerce giants that have come in and grown the market with and flooded the market, frankly, with a lot of very cheap product with unknown provenance. So we, what's the answer? In a word, I think it's in 2 words. It's about systems change, and it's about all of the different aspects of our system coming together. It's about consumers, it's about manufacturers, it's about brands, and it's also about government. And how do we bring together all of those parts of that system to drive change? And that's, for example, so the Australian Fashion Council incubated the Seamless program, the product stewardship scheme for textiles, because there's no one brand that can solve these problems, and we all have to come together to drive those solutions and tackle the gaps in our circularity infrastructure, have better thinking and more knowledge about how do we design clothing in a way that enables it to be recycled, etc., etc.
Now that's a perfect segue to Ainsley to talk us through what you're doing, this new organisation. It's fascinating.
Yeah, good morning, and what a great way to spend Sunday on Gadigal country. So I have recently commenced with Seamless, which is the world's first circularity product stewardship scheme, and that's really exciting. Traditionally, at a global scale, product stewardship is really only addressing the end of life of products. Seamless is going to be looking at from inception right through to end of life, and that's going to be game changing, and I do think that Seamless will take the world by storm. In terms of the work that we're doing, our purpose is really simple. It's to help people choose, enjoy and recycle more responsibly here in Australia. And you've heard the numbers already this morning, but there is an alarming amount of clothing that is going to landfill every single year, and all of us can do better. So I'll share this morning a little bit about what we're going to be doing, but if I had to answer your question about what can we do to eliminate waste, the very first thing that we need to do is actually eliminate the word waste, because the more we refer to it as waste, the less we value. And I remember growing up, I never ever thought of my clothes as disposable. They were never destined for decomposition. They always had a second life, be it my cousins or, friends, rags, you name it. They were repurposed over and over again. So I think we do need to rev up the resources or whatever for your next season. But we do need to eliminate the word waste. And I know that it works because when I was working in construction, when we last had a conversation, we removed waste from our technical manual for infrastructure. And where that system is right now is that the majority of projects which are achieving sustainability ratings are diverting 98% of their resources from landfill. So it does work when you value products differently. So that's where I think we should start.
Yeah, I think that change to disposability in clothes is a big part of it, isn't it? A very, very different thing. Nina.
Yes.
Tell us where you come in and what you think the solution is.
So I wear 2 hats, the Australia Institute and Eco Styles. So I'll start with Eco Styles because that's what came first. So weird story, I grew up watching movies from the 40s and 50s. Developed a love for vintage style from a very young age. When I was a teenager, I grew up in the U.S. As a teenager, my family, we moved to West Africa, Nigeria, where a lot of the clothes that do not sell get exported to, right? Secondhand clothes, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And at the time, vintage wasn't trending, so I wasn't trending to West. So a lot of the vintage stuff that we love and are expensive now was being exported because people didn't value it, right? Talk about waste, right? And this was stuff I used to watch in the movies, and I loved it, you know? So dresses that you see, the kind of dresses you see on Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, and that was literally how my career started at age 14, 15, by buying this stuff in Nigeria. As much as I loved it, I saw how much it was polluting the environment. I would see the mountains of waste, toxic groundwater, and all of that stuff, and how businesses there were closing down, how it was impacting the textiles industry, local textiles industry, much like how fast fashion is forcing a lot of businesses here to close down because of competition. So that's literally how my career started. I would not be here if not for waste. I don't know what I'd be doing, maybe teaching, I don't know, but that's how I started. So for years and years, I've been focused on getting people to use stuff that we dispose of. And I spent years doing that. Fortunately, in 2015, there's a documentary that came out called The True Cost, and then with 2017, War on Waste, thanks to Craig and the wonderful team, it became more of a national conversation, a global conversation because of all these different platforms. So I work with schools and communities to teach them ways of fun, exciting, stylish ways of reusing clothes. But I realized that we needed policy, like immediately, because the problem was only getting worse. You had fast fashion, and now you have ultra fast fashion, and we don't know what's coming next. I always say supersonic fast fashion, right? So I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with Australia Institute, where we can do research, deeper research into some of these issues, and look more holistic. Hopefully, we try to look more holistically at what we can do to change the system, because it's only going to get worse if we don't disrupt the system as it is.
Absolutely. Supersonic fast fashion. Well, you just try the clothes on and then you throw it out immediately in the shop. It's great. Yeah,
it's a whole system from, the moment you order, it just arrives, teleportation, and throw it out. Yeah, exactly.
How could we get it much faster? It does my head in. Jaana, let's start with the Australian Fashion Council. As you say, you represent the kind of Australian side of fashion. What proportion of the fashion bought in Australia is actually made by Australians? And then I guess the question is then, how is Australian fashion trying to take on sustainability whilst in this battle with fast fashion that's coming in from, well, predominantly China, but all over the world?
Yeah, so at the moment, about 3% of what we buy in Australia is manufactured here. We do have a small, I wouldn't necessarily say thriving, but very resilient manufacturing market. If you've survived this long, you're really resilient. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to consider how we preference and invest in the Australian manufacturing sector, particularly because we grow amazing cotton and wool, and then we have to send it offshore to be processed. So we've sort of broken that supply chain. Some of it comes back to be made into the clothing at the final stage. But there's an opportunity for Australians to support that market and keep things closer to home. I guess to your question around, how are we as an industry, I think. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know who Shein, it's an international e-commerce giant which essentially entered the market in Australia in the last couple of years. Latest figures show that they've got over $2 billion of revenue in Australia. The entire fashion market, as I said before, is in the 20-something billions. It's like Australians love this cheap directly imported product, and it's creating a lot of challenges for the fashion market. I mean, whether it's copyright and IP. I know one Australian fashion brand, which is very print driven. They cannot do a pre-order on their product, because if they do a pre-order, it will be available on Shein before they have managed to get it into store. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Like, what is there any? Is the Australian government kind of doing anything? Is there any kind of way we can stop this? Like, as you said, intellectual property law. Surely there's something we can do. It seems terrible.
It's very difficult to implement intellectual property law in an international context. And frankly, these brands, small Australian brands, don't have the resources. There's a lot of other things that other governments are doing, for example, around introduction of taxes on the import of direct-to-consumer imports, or lowering the threshold where the imports kick in. So ours is $1,000 at the moment. Apparently Shein will just divide your parcel into multiple ones if you've spent over $1,000 anyway, so you don't need to, you can avoid paying the duties.
Given how cheap Shein is, $1,000 of Shein would fill this room.
It must be really hard.
With the cheap polyester.
Yeah.
Okay. So...
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of complex issues, and there's an unlevel playing field for Australian brands. But how are they, tackling with the very resilient market? There's a lot of smaller Australian fashion brands are very focused on locally made, transitioning on. The materials that they use, there's incredible number have joined Seamless. There's a lot of transition. We've moved quite quickly in the Australian market in the past 10 years in terms of evolving around sustainability. For me, I think there's still a gap in the way that we acknowledge and preference that Australian made and designed. I think there's still an opportunity for consumers, particularly, to play a better role in keeping that, in the market here.
Totally. Let's go to Seamless then. Ainsley, can you explain to us, with the product stewardship of Seamless, how much of the kind of Australian companies are involved in it? And do you have any, as part of your product stewardship, do you have any, do you have, like, the Sheins and these kind of companies, are they involved in any way? Do you have any kind of sway over them? Or is it kind of voluntary in terms of whether they come on board?
So for everyone who's not particularly familiar with the word product stewardship, what it means, you would be very familiar with take-back programs for batteries and for bottles. We're doing the same for clothing, so that we create end-of-life and alternate options for when your clothes are not ready to share with your friends any longer. And right now they're heading for the red bin. So the way in which Seamless is going to operate is that there is a per garment levy for new garments that are placed on the Australian market. Now, when Seamless was originally founded, and the AFC did steward us through that early stage and were instrumental in developing the design of the scheme, we were working off 2019 data. And that data indicated that 1.8 billion units are entering Australia every year. When you divide that by the total number of Australians, that means that there are 56 items on the market available for us to purchase, which is an extraordinary amount. Now, that was pre-Shein and Temu. So we know that those numbers are different, and it's one of the very first things we're going to be doing in this year is baselining all the stocks and flows when it comes to clothing, so we understand what's coming in. The way the stewardship scheme works for clothing is that brands and retailers that are placing product on the market need to pay 4 cents for every new garment that is put on the market. Now, if we were buying 56, or the available stock that was on the market, that would be about $2.23 per Australian. So a very fair and reasonable place for us to start. We're also looking at how we can reward those brands which join Seamless as they do better. So what is the quality of the product they're putting on the market? How recyclable is it? What kind of fibres does it contain? What are they doing to extend the useful life of that garment? Because they are responsible for that product from the start right to its end of life and disposal. So that's how we're getting started. Through our establishment year, which commenced on 1 July last year, we had 8 foundation members. Now, those members are well-known and well-recognised brands, and those that are contributing actually see the benefit of pooled investment, because this is a problem that no one brand can solve on their own. It's a systemic change. It's something that does require holistic solutions. That's not possible with any one or two brands doing it on their own.
No, absolutely. Kirsten, I want to come to you, and we talk about this kind of, we've got a cost of living problem at the moment. We've got, all of this stuff is often the cheapest alternative, is this overseas stuff. How do we then move back to a kind of culture of repairing, and how do we get the skills to be repairers and do this kind of stuff? How do we change that approach?
So we've lost a few generations of makers, and I think I was lucky enough to grow up with both grandparents making clothes and repairing clothes. I have a mother who still makes her own clothes. I make my own clothes. If I'm going to have a proud parent moment, it was when I came home one day, and if we've got 19-year-old sons, they don't come out of their bedroom that often. Mine was standing in the hallway with a sock that I had knitted him, and he was darning it. Now, he couldn't find a darning mushroom, but he had used a lemon. And he had the needle and the thread out, and he was so proud of that. I said, right, you're using the wrong thread, but that's awesome. Run down, see Nanny, get the right thread, and continue darning. He did, and when I got back home, he'd finished his sock. He travelled around Europe last year, took a repair kit with him, and was really proud of what he'd achieved. I think we need we're talking a lot about resources today, but there's the human resources as well, and I think that doesn't get spoken to enough. So I think if you actually make something, you value it more. So we need to get back to making. We need to get back to tinkering, being curious, undoing things. One of the most popular workshops that we do at Reverse Garbage is simply putting kids in a room with screwdrivers, teaching them then which end of the screwdriver to hold, because a lot of them, these subjects, I'm going to go on for hours. Rip this microphone off me, but they don't know which end of a screwdriver to hold, Phillips head, flathead, whatever the difference is. We put them in a room with a pile of e-waste. They get to take it apart and see what's inside. It is the most liberating thing they have ever done. Well, maybe not, but besides, we will send them outside first and let them climb trees without something to fall on. But it's the joy of seeing what's inside things and how they work and the conversations that leads to. I think making and repairing I've written down, all right, I want things to be slowly done. I don't believe in slow fashion, it's slow style. I think if we can make things individualise, and this dress that I've made today is out of coin bags. There's a few different, rants going on within this dress, but that has started conversations even before I sat down today. So the value of things needs to be really, really valued. So years ago, I'm talking 17th, 18th centuries, the only woman that had the keys to the linen press was the woman of the house. It wasn't the servants, it wasn't the maids, it was the woman, the lady of the house, to use the old-fashioned terminology. Textiles and linen, textiles and linen had a value, all right? And if we can also then go talk about the conditions of the people making those textiles and those linens. They haven't really improved much today, but you can see that they were valued, they were repurposed. Oh, look, third time lucky. So they were valued, they were repurposed, and then they found the next person would use them. And if you look at the history of costume, which is something I have done for many years, that things were taken in and out. Things were redone. They were, as fashion changed, the item you had changed. I'm going to skip. The reason why we only have a dustbin, we call it a dustbin because that was the only thing that went in the bin, dust. It was the end of everything. Everything, not just fashion, found a second home, a reuse, and all that went in the bin was the dust. That is why it's called a dustbin. Now it's called a waste bin. And going back to your point before, everything is not waste, it's a resource. So we don't talk about the waste hierarchy anymore, we talk about the resource hierarchy.
There's a bit of a challenge for you, Adam. If you can make it so the City of Sydney, you can only put dust in the bin.
Well, but
What do you reckon, guys? Is that a challenge?
But, you know, we talk about the rag and bone man, and they literally went around collecting rags and bones were used in, so it's a huge... I love it. It's fascinating, but it's also worrying, and it keeps you awake at night. So what was the question?
Well, that's all right. You've kind of answered it away. I'm going to go to Nina, because this is the part we kind of said, we need to be repairing more. We need to be making our own clothes. We need to be doing this kind of stuff. And the reason things were repaired in the past was because they had value, and they were much more, in a sense, everything's got so cheap now, it's taken away the value, it's changed our perception of clothing. It used to be an item was an expensive thing that had to be repaired. Nowadays, you've got clothing that it can feel like, it's almost like a coffee. I bought this just to get a little bit of a high. I enjoyed the buying process. I wear it once or twice. I put it on Instagram. Then I don't really need to wear it again. So, Nina, what kind of policy change, what do we need to do to change that? Can we change it? I mean, if we suggested something where we go, we're going to make all clothing much more expensive, people would riot in the streets. So how do we fix this? How do we kind of put value back into it?
First of all, I love what you just said about like buying cheap clothes, like getting a coffee. That's a concept like caffeine fashion. Is what you call it? Yeah.
The caffeine hit.
I'll credit you for that. Caffeine hit. We definitely need. Did you
just
say?
quickly? If anyone can repair lights or microphones, you're needed here today.
In the house.
Maybe we just stop saying the S word. Okay. People, I don't know if people might riot in the streets, but I think there are better things to riot about, that you can't buy cheap clothes that are disposable. And I keep trying to bring into the conversation the fact that a lot of these clothes have toxic chemicals, right, that cause cancers. And Shein products for toddlers were tested and had 20 times the amount of lead that was considered safe. Now, we know that lead impacts developmental issues, particularly in young children. So I think the more we have this conversation, I think people are less likely to rally in the streets. I think we need to talk about the health impacts of fast fashion, ultra fast fashion more often. That's one. We alluded earlier that this problem has gotten worse, and it's only going to get worse still. So we have so many, and I'm sure Seamless and Australian Fashion Council, you can talk about this further. How many brands have been forced to close in the last few years? Australian brands have been forced to close in the last few years because they can't keep up with the competition. So what's going to happen is that our legacy, our fashion legacy, will become Shein and Temu and AliExpress in Australia. You go to op shops, you go to clothes swaps, and that will be our legacy. Is that what we want? Are we happy with that? We have to ask ourselves these questions. Because personally, I think Australia has some of the best designers in the world. I'm biased, but I'm a fan of retro and vintage fashion. This skirt is from the 60s, an Australian designer named Sally Brown. I found it in a market in 2017. I'm a huge fan of Studebaker Hawk, an 80s designer, many other 80s designers. And I think, what happened to all these brands? And I think what happened, and people say something about neoliberal policies. I'm like, okay, whatever. But really, we have to ask ourselves if Shein is what we want to be our wardrobe, what we want our wardrobes to be full of. So we need policy to stop this flow, to interrupt this flow, whether we like it or not. And we're used to, taxes and policies that we don't like. And the government imposes these taxes. We have a housing crisis. We have fossil fuel subsidies and all of this stuff. And we don't rally in the streets for that. Why would we rally? Because we're being, there's a tax on fast fashion. But as we impose these taxes, I think the thing to do as well simultaneously is not just impose them, but also introduce other alternatives, right? There's an article I saw on Yahoo early this morning about op shops being too expensive. And yeah, they have become too expensive. I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's a whole other conversation. However, I reposted it and I said, there are things like clothes swaps. Anybody can host a clothes swaps. It's free. You get clothes for free. Why are we not systemizing things like clothes swaps? So as we introduce these measures, we should also give people alternatives, right? Better alternatives, healthy. And Kirsten talked about repairing. We can always have more repair cafes, and these are things that are very easy for the government to support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, swaps is a great idea. Again, when we are facing this cost of living crisis, it's amazing that we still have such high spending on fashion in the middle of this, and that we're not doing more things like clothes swaps and that.
May I add something, Craig?
Yeah,
I just wanted to add as well that we often think about policy and the sort of blunt instruments of taxes and so forth, which, absolutely can play a role. It's also a huge role for government procurement to play. And in supporting a really thriving local manufacturing industry, which is directly connected to the kind of capabilities we have around repair and the skills that we need to do that, around creating provenance around clothing, understanding where your stuff comes from, and sort of celebrating and recognising a local industry. The government buys a lot of textiles between uniforms for health or police or fire or all sorts of different things, and they're very high volume. If a lot more of that was preferencing, made in Australia, and they were preferencing that and leveraging that spend, doesn't require another grants program or another, it's actually money that's being spent anyway, and actually has a broader, more indirect social and economic benefits, as well as creating a really thriving local industry.
Yeah, I think there's an example. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority just did a clothing procurement thing, and they ended up kind of buying. They wanted to reduce plastics and microplastics. They ended up buying a cotton, and they ended up doing it through Australian companies here. Interestingly enough, though, there was one part of it that drove me nuts, right? The reason they were buying new clothing is because they'd had a rebranding.
Don't get me started.
Which drives me nuts. I was talking at a procurement conference the other day, and I said, the first thing you do is you sack the rebranding people in the world, because you're not doing it for need, you're doing it because we just changed the bloody brand on it.
The Carsons of the world have got to go.
Yeah.
I've also heard about government departments, because they have to, when you source offshore, you often have to have certain minimums, like 10,000 pieces, for example, of a size run. And actually, obviously, maybe, for replen, i.e. replenishing the stock available, maybe they only need 500 mediums, but they actually have to order 10,000. So they're just,
so nuts, isn't it?
They're just having, so it's kind of like there's an opportunity for the local market to play a much more dynamic role, I think, in terms of sourcing.
Absolutely. Adam, I want to come to you here. You can answer what we've talked about, but what I want to ask you, Adam, is that, because policy is one part, right? And I'm going to briefly defend Shein and the fast fashion brands. I know you're surprised, right? If somebody is young, doesn't have much money, and buys a $20 pair of jeans, but wears it for 5 years and repairs it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually not like the thing. It's not necessarily the fact that piece of fashion is bad in itself. It's how we use fashion now. It's how we changed it to becoming this disposable item. And this goes back to your previous job as a fashion publicist. Fashion has been built in a way that it's about quick churn. It's about showing something new. I remember in the previous War on Waste, we were chatting to the young girl, and the thing that drove people nuts, particularly probably this crowd, was when the one young girl said, "Oh no, I can't really wear that out again because I've already put it on Instagram." And I was like, it's like I've shown it once, I can't show it again. How do we change that mentality, that whole mindset that we have about fashion? And because a fashion organisation, a fashion company, and this is where the idea of sustainable fashion is still, in my mind, a hazy one, because fashion is about churn. It's about the new fashion. It's about the change. How do we change that mindset, but still in a way that the companies can actually make money in?
Look, I think we have to realise we're here to talk about fast fashion. Fast fashion is an addiction. I think we need to accept that. And I was reading something recently where if we want to get people off that addiction, sadly, because the way we are, we have to give those people another addiction. I mean, it's a sad fact. But the thing is,
that's why City is selling drugs now.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
But the thing is, with fast fashion, I think there's two relatively easy ways to slow it down. Is one, hit people in the pocket. It shouldn't be that cheap. It shouldn't be. And Lottie from Banish, which is one of my favourite organisations, and she always says, yes, at Banish, if you want to send in your waste, you've got to pay for it. It's your waste. You created it, you have to pay for it. So I think that at fast fashion level, an ultra-fast fashion level, you should pay for it. The other area we need to be looking at is education. And I think that's really, really important. And, you know, we have to look at where we're being influenced. And, you know, like most people love that show, Emily Loves Paris. They like Sex and the City. Have you ever seen anybody wear the same outfit twice? So that is actually getting to the heads of people. They're sitting there watching Netflix and it's like, oh yes, you know, she wore that, she turned the corner and she's in a new dress. The thing is, you know, Sex and the City like really got up my nerves when that came back, because there is a warehouse in, I think it's in New Jersey, and it houses every outfit from the original Sex and the City. Now, how smart would that have been for the costume designer, for the reboot, to have some of those iconic pieces continually through the show? That starts to get into people's head, actually, I need to use that again. I don't know, I think I grabbed something the other day about the new Emily in Paris that started last week, that I think there's something, Nina, you might know, is it she using, have they used vestiaire or something? So they're starting to use, you know, secondhand pieces, which is great. But also, you know, I watch the red carpets. We all watch the red carpets, you know, the BAFTAs, the Oscars, you know, it all, you know, it's a circus. But again, and I got this idea, and I actually messaged a few international celebrity stylists. One person came back and said, oh, good idea. So I'm just letting you know, I'm going to say this one here in case it ever happens, because it was my idea. Like, somebody, say it's going to be Cate Blanchett. So Cate Blanchett is in a movie and she's going to do every single red carpet because that movie is going to be swept. I kept saying to these stylists, why don't you just put them in the same dress for every single red carpet, but you change the jewelry? Because the jewelry is a sustainable product. You can melt it down, you can change it around, no one's going to toss it out. But just put them in the same dress so that finally someone's going to say, is that the same dress that you wore in London, in Venice? You know, we need to start thinking.
But the point is, it's against the business model. Like, the reason they're wearing the new clothing is because they're trying to sell the new brand, and that's why they get it for free and do it. And that's where you kind of go, I don't really understand, how do we change the business model?
But, you know, the thing is, you know, people turn around to me and say, you're suggesting people, you know, not spend, which is going to hurt the industry. Absolutely not. Just don't buy shit. It's that simple. Don't buy the shit.
Or as much shit.
Yeah, but you know what? Just, you know, buy less, buy better. You know, I was fortunate. I worked with Carla Zampatti for 17 years. What an amazing person. Still miss her to this, you know, to this day. But Carla only ever had about 8 or 10 pieces of clothing in her wardrobe. You know, she just had the basics. You know, she would, you know, she only had like, I think it was like 3 necklaces and a watch and a few rings, but she knew her style. She was comfortable in her style. She was her brand. She stuck with that style. And this is what we have to get. We have to get off the fashion bandwagon and we have to get into the style bandwagon. Look, I don't know how we go about, you know, doing it, but as you said, right, we need to be doing it collectively.
Absolutely. Well, Nina and Jaana both jumped in there, so I'll go to you guys. This is what you want.
I'll just say that this shameless plug for an Australian Fashion Council member, Marjorie Natura, this year at Fashion Week in May, actually put the last season back on the runway. And then there's 2 other, eBay, and again, a partner of the Australian Fashion Council, had both Anna Kwan and Leandra, both had second-hand pieces on the runway. So I think there's very small iotas of change. I think eBay and Love Island in the UK, eBay has dressed everybody in Love Island with second-hand
I thought everyone
pieces.
was naked on Love Island. I don't know. I watched this.
That's true. I've never actually watched Love Island.
Neither
so
have I.
I don't think I'm
I
the
didn't get
target.
the sense there's a lot of clothes there.
I don't think I'm the target market, but so there's very small changes, but we definitely, I totally agree with that. It's the way that it's positioned in the industry is extremely important.
Yeah, I think to your question about if somebody buys fast fashion. Now, when you're recommending, you say stop buying fast fashion. But in reality, when I'm speaking to people, I never actually say stop buying fast fashion, because as you alluded to, that's what some people, it's the only thing some people can afford, right? It's about using it for long periods of time. Now, there's this other thing I'm not encouraging buying fast fashion, but there's this other thing called planned obsolescence. So with fast fashion, it's designed not to last, right? So keeping it, some products do because it's made of plastic, but some don't. So there's that side of the equation. But, you know, I think that we've been coerced from birth to see materials as disposable and use ones, particularly in the global north countries. So that shift, culture shift, I think particularly, we need that particularly here in Australia because we're the biggest consumers. Now, a country like France, they naturally consume less. The average person consumes, I think, less than 10 kilos of clothing per person. In Australia, it's almost 15 kilos. And when we're researching the report, the textiles report at the Australian Institute, we spoke to a post-growth researcher who's based in Paris, and she said that French women, they restyle their clothes more often. They'll have a dress, and they'll, you know, you're talking about collars and patty, they'll restyle it, use it in several different ways, so they don't buy as much Shein and other things. And I think that's something that we have to introduce in Australia as well, not just a blanket policy or say stop buying. Because the other thing is that, particularly with the Zoomers, Gen Z, we say buy better quality, buy less. They don't. I feel like they don't know what better quality is. What does quality mean? And like quality to maybe most of us here is, okay, silk, natural fabrics. But someone who their entire lives, they grew up with iPads from, you know, being a toddler, and everything they know is made of plastic. What's quality? What does quality mean? Right? Quality means whatever your favorite influencer is hawking to you that day, right? So I think there needs to be an entire re-education and a cultural shift. And I think we can use the same tools that the fast fashion industry uses to coerce people into buying so much. So use influencers in the right way, show that slow fashion, sustainable style, whatever you want to call it, can be, you know, whatever you want it to be, trendy, although I hate trends, I abhor trends, but can be stylish, can look amazing, that slow fashion is not just earth tones, and this is not how I feel, this is just the, I work with kids in school, so they have very interesting concepts of what sustainable fashion is. It's not just earth tones and burlap sacks. You know, it can actually be colorful, it can be fun, it can be playful, all the things that they want, but we need to also counsel this notion of trends. I hate trends. My slogan is we need to get off the fashion treadmill, because it's what has made us think, okay, this is a trend, we wear it temporarily and we throw it away. And that's literally what fuels waste. So we need to cut out this concept of trends, not just in fashion, but in other industries as well, because that's what fuels waste streams.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to make that fashion churn unfashionable. If anyone has any suggestions, let's see how we can do it. Sorry, you would, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, I completely agree around the trends and the addiction. But the reason why folks are addicted and they are looking at trends is because we're also, by those very same channels, regularly told, there we go, come a bit closer, regularly told that we're not enough. So it's driving this desire and this want rather than what we need. But if we reflect back on First Nations practices, you take what you need, you use all that you take, and you share. And you share what you take. So I think that normalising reuse and having influencers, and even Princess Kate has often been spotted wearing the same outfits, and that's now seen as trendy. So I think it's helpful. The 4 pillars that Seamless are going to be operating on, one of them is citizen behaviour change, because we need to change how people choose. And that's not going to happen quickly. So I encourage you all here today, because you're probably not the ones that need to hear this, but lead from the middle. You know, don't try and be perfect. We need everyone being imperfectly making progress. The other thing is the circular business models. Now, we have got brands and supporters, because Seamless is not just for brands, it's also for the value chain that are supporting the manufacturing and the recycling and the reuse and the resale and the repair. But an example of that is we've got Oraton as one of our brands, and they've partnered with one of our supporters, Renter. what they've found is they have reached an entirely new target market through a rental platform, and they are actually having more repeat sales and volume move through that channel than what they do at this time when we're in a slightly difficult economic position. More people are shopping through that channel than what they are buying new. And it's a completely different customer as well, because those that can buy new don't want to rent because they don't need to, but those that rent wouldn't necessarily be able to afford new. So I think there are definitely circular business models, which is one of our other strategic pillars that we can look at. How can we address some of the business models so that we decouple virgin resource and the growth and still have a very sustainable fashion and clothing industry?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. The rental does seem to have gone off. There's so many more examples of that now. And I think that is, when you talk about the next generation, that's becoming a bit more of a standard thing, which is a great thing. Now, I want to ask a question, because we just heard the word sustainable fashion there. And I guess we've been talking at the moment about how we use it, how we change our minds, that kind of stuff. A question, because I don't necessarily know the answer to that. This is one we struggled with on War and Waste. What is sustainable fashion, and what materials do you think are more sustainable? It's a very difficult kind of question for me. Well, I think because we have a natural response to kind of go, about 60% of our clothing now is made of plastic, which most people don't really recognise nowadays, which is interesting. I think there's some people always go, well, I don't buy that, I buy natural materials. They also have their own footprint. There's a huge water footprint for cotton. Wool there's a kind of climate impact. So how do we make fashion, no matter what it's made of, more sustainable? And I guess anything interesting you guys have come across, what do you consider to be sustainable fashion, and where are you going?
Well, we probably all have a good go at this. So I'll get started having both mics, and then Nina, and we can move there. But from Seamless's perspective, the future is where our clothing is made from renewable, recyclable, and safe material.
Is this it now?
I think one of them is. I think one of them.
Okay. So I think sustainability, first and foremost, whether it's sustainable fashion, circular fashion, first and foremost, as Ainsley alluded to, is we have to drastically, and I mean drastically, reduce how much we're manufacturing in the first place, how much we're extracting from the earth to make products that we use for a short time to impress people we don't know or maybe even don't like, and then throw it away. First of all, drastically reduce how much we're extracting from the earth, how much materials, and then whatever materials, products are in circulation, figure out how we can make them circular, reuse, recycle, whatever. I think that's what sustainability is. But whilst doing that, and I mentioned earlier about people who can only afford fast fashion, buying fast fashion. It's not because I'm encouraging buying fast fashion. It's because of an element that we always exclude from this conversation, which is the garment workers in the global south. It's about them as well, keeping, it's good for them to have employment. And they're often in such dire conditions that something is better than nothing. So if we're buying fast fashion, it's not buying if we have to, it's not about buying excessively and just buying what we need, but at least it keeps someone somewhere in employment that they desperately need and not destitute. So that's what generally I think sustainability means for me.
Adam, did you want to add? What do you think sustainable fashion is?
I'm going to get in trouble. I don't think fashion is sustainable. I think it's as simple as that. Yeah. I think we...
Well, I think you're right. So let's take out the word fashion. What's sustainable clothing?
I just don't think... The most sustainable use of your clothing is to keep it in its original form for as long as possible. And I think, the other thing, we talk about our end of life. Well, what's end of life? End of life to me is where it's literally falling apart. End of life is not, it's still in good condition. So I think just as we need to stop using the word waste, I think we also need to stop using end of life because, I think that's a bit of a furphy. But, because, we spoke about this when I was working with Thread Together. So we did a program with Cotton Australia where we had, at Thread Together, we had excess cotton business shirts. Horrific, it's going to sound horrific, but we had extra small, and we had 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 extra large shirts because the industry buys badly. It's size breakup. So we had excess. We would never be able to use them. So we decided to work with Cotton Australia to shred these garments, brand new garments, shred them, and actually churn them back into the soil, and it was regenerating. The trouble is, it's just not financially viable to do it. So you've got a 100% cotton garment. The chances are it's got a polyester thread which is stitched together because the cotton thread will break easier. It's fused, it's got a placket, it's got buttons on it, it's got a sew-in label. You've got to decommission that whole garment, then you've got to shred it, and then put it back into the soil. But what do you do with all the pieces if you decommission? They go to landfill. So the thing is, I get back to what you were saying before. Is what is sustainable clothing? What is sustainable fashion? I don't think the industry itself is sustainable. I think we can try and be more sustainable, but I just encourage everybody. If you're going to buy something, whether it's clothing, whether it's a chair, whether it's a vase in the house, are you buying it for life, or are you buying it knowing that it's going to end up in landfill? And if it's going to end up in landfill, don't buy it in the first place.
It's interesting because a lot of people you talk to, yes, I agree. Yeah, a lot of people we talk to as well will go, I don't put any of my clothes in landfill because I take them to Vinnie's or whatever. Yep. Now, the reality is that in some ways is a bit of an out. People think, because the reality is that only about 15% of that actually gets resold. A lot of that gets sent overseas. As Nita's example, if it goes to Nigeria or something, ends up not being resold there, ends up in kind of waste there. It's kind of seen as a bit of an excuse. We have to kind of slow down. Even if you're giving to Vinnie's, we still have to slow down the amount of used. Putting aside that kind of charity option, have you seen, is there any real recycling of clothing going on? I mean, there's Blocktex in Queensland, which is kind of tries to separate cotton and polyester. They found a way, but is there really any recycling of clothes as an option when we talk about it?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
Going back to what is sustainable fashion, style, whatever, it is slowing down consumption, and that has huge capitalist over, our whole way of extraction is to exponential growth. And I think that is one of the first things that needs to be tackled, that we can't keep extracting for exponential capital return. So, which is the other rant of my dress. So, it's made out of old coin bags. This is in the day where coins were taken to the bank in a calico bag that was made to last, and now we put it in plastic bags. It's also a time when, I really am diverting, going away from the circular economy, from sustainable fashion, but it points to the fact that we were slower, that branches were there for people, and I think that we can't go backwards, but I think we can look at the past to drive and take hints from the past to drive the future. So I can't understand why people want to walk around in petrol. There's a beautiful New Zealand, and you call it plastic, but you're walking around in petrol. There's an amazing ad for New Zealand wool, and I know wool has its own ups, farts, sheep's farts, methane, all that. But there's this beautiful ad, and I encourage you to all look New Zealand wool ad petrol. It'll come up on YouTube, and you are swimming in a bath of petrol, and you walk out into wool. And it is, and for me, and I'm getting to that lovely age where I can be cranky, and I do utter under my breath when I see people walking around, and I just go, "You're wearing petrol." And I think for me, it's a reality check at this moment of just look what we're doing and how, as individuals, we can start the conversation, reach out to local government, high up. It's happening, but the only thing that needs to happen faster is some controls and some actual something happening. And
we need some policy to help.
Yeah, we need that policy to help, because lots of people want to help, lots of people want to do the right thing, but we haven't got the answers, and all of us that are worrying about it potentially need some sleep.
I'm going to come to you in 2 seconds, Ainsley, to answer the recycling question. Just while we are talking about natural fibres, I mean, there are some real positives that come from natural fibres, and I think the main one that I noticed is you don't have to wash them nearly as much. And obviously, one of the interesting things about clothing is that part of of its kind of carbon footprint and its sustainability footprint is actually how often it's washed. And particularly nowadays, we're finding with polyester clothes that when they're washed, they release microplastics that go into the ocean, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm just not wanting to come across as being anti-natural fibres. There's a lot of positives from that. That do come from that kind of thing. But yes, let's go. You just wanted to come back to that, Ainsley, because you're obviously looking at this about making fashion, clothing more circular. When you kind of get to that point of going, okay, it's at the end of its life, it can't be worn anymore, are you seeing any kind of bits of recycling coming through?
We certainly do have some really good technologies and recyclers on shore already, and end of life does mean when it's wholly and it's no good for anything else. And we've seen a really strong support from the recycling sector in joining as supporters. So the Waste Management Resource Recovery Associations come on board. They're encouraging their members. We've got Resource Co, Textile Recyclers Australia, Eco Samsara, and then also other commercial entities like Recycle and After that have joined us as well. What we know about behaviour change in Australia, Australians do want to do the right thing. They do want to recycle, but it has to be accessible, convenient, and free. And right now we don't have that system in place. So with 97% of our garments and clothing, we don't use fashion clothing, is being imported. If we look at what the recycling systems are, we do need to look at fibre to fibre. And again, natural fibres are a real hero there because they can be repurposed back into fibre, back into yarn, back into materials for clothing. But we do have a very full system of blended fabric and, the crude oil components in polyester, which are less likely. Polyester can be remade into polyester and remanufactured into clothing, but we've got that messy middle bit that we are going to need to find solutions for. So there are, again, supporters like ours, ShredX, where they shred once they've collected them, sorted them, disassembled them, then they can shred them, and that goes into alternate products for insulation, underlay of flooring. There are multiple different purposes now for roads and construction and concrete additives. So I think we can look at open loop and closed loop systems. Fibre to fibre is the holy grail, but we won't entirely get there.
And as you say, we need the money to be researched, and that's where it comes in. If we're charging 4 cents per garment,
yes.
If it becomes mandatory, that means there's money there to actually create this system.
And when we get to 60% of the market, we'll have about $36 million a year to invest in some of these systems. Because while we do have really great examples here in Australia right now, if we asked Australia to open their closets, we would not be able to manage the volume that comes out, and that is definitely not what Seamless wants.
No, absolutely.
If we keep coming, we need to come up with solutions for end of life product. But the thing is, my concern is that if we come up with all these solutions for it, it's not going to incentivize people to not buy the product in the first place. So you're going to be compounding because it's going to be, there's a place for it, so I can put it there. I still think we need to get to the front end, which is what I want to bring at the City of Sydney is let's look at the behavioural change that needs to be put in place so that people stop creating waste to start with. The waste solution is going to be the easy part.
Yeah, absolutely.